Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss why the so-called Red Wall is the key battleground for the next general election. It's an offence to the spirit of democracy that it should be the case, but although it is an extreme example, it's just how politics works in every democracy in the world. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I had a comment recently asking, why is so much attention being focused on the Red Wall? Why are Labour tailoring these policies largely for this area of the country when it seems to be excluding so many others? And the reason is because that's how politics works in democracies. First past the post makes it more extreme. You know, this is why other forms are better. But you do get it in other systems as well. It's just spread out a bit more. To win an election, you have to appeal to a relatively narrow range of people. No other way. If you try and talk about policies for this group or that group or this other group, you end up with a confused overall offer. People want a small number of simple offers upon which to base their political calculations. Hence the success of the three-word slogans. When the winning side, if you look at their strategy, you will often see a situation where with the winning side, they had a few small policies. You think about the Conservatives in 2019. What was it? Get Brexit done, level up the country. That was it. There wasn't anything else. That was it. You know, and it's not as bad a system as it may appear. You know, as long as you get a good government elected, they'll still govern for all groups. It's just that their campaign is targeted at the important voters. Because the simple flowchart would look like this. You ask yourself, okay, so we're trying to appeal to groups. Which groups to appeal to? Does this group vote in large numbers? Yes or no? If yes, okay, we move on to the next box. If no, you don't spend much campaign time on them. Don't spend your resources. Why would you? Limited resources, you can only afford a small number of major policy announcements. You have a broad range of policy announcements in your manifesto, so people can't accuse you of not having a broad range of policies, but you focus, whenever you do interviews, whenever you're campaigning, the leaflets through the door, you focus on a very small number. If you try to be all things to all people, you end up being nothing to everyone. So if the group does vote in large numbers, then you ask yourself, would enough of them consider voting for us? Are they swing voters that we can capture? And are they in the seats where it'll matter? Like if you can't swing enough of their votes to make a difference in the seats that can be flipped, you still don't bother. You know, when you apply this process to the next Westminster elections, the key voters are in the so-called Red Wall, parts of the north of England. Yes, Labour winning these back doesn't get them a majority government. Of course, it's not that simple, but that's very unlikely anyway. But it does remove the Conservatives from majority government. Remove their majority from Parliament and an alliance of opposition parties can at least work with moderate Conservative MPs to reverse some of the madness. Win enough seats for Labour to form a minority government and that reversal can go further. And it's not just Labour making this calculation either, the Conservatives have also. So consider, why is Boris Johnson still Prime Minister? Despite the scandals, despite the failures, these would have obliterated previous leaders. Boris Johnson is poor in government, even by Tory standards. And what's more, they knew that when they elected him. They elected him to win a majority in the next election. That was his one job, and he did it. The reason Johnson is still in place is because Conservative MPs do not think they have anyone else who can win over enough voters in the north of England seats that formed their 2019 winning platform. If they lose the so-called Red Wall, they're out of power. Some have wondered if the Tories wouldn't mind losing the next election. Well, you know, and there's logic in it. Let Labour win in their weak minority government, attack everything they do. The pain won't go away as such, it'll just be eased because Labour aren't able to go full-on reversal on Brexit. So the problems of Brexit that are dismissed in the mainstream media now will suddenly be put under the most intense spotlight with Labour in power. Then they can come back to power to say, let's get Brexit done properly. They said they'd make Brexit work. Is it working? Does it sound like it's working to you? Is it Eckers like? So Conservatives come back to power and then they stay there for another 10 or 15 years. And every bit of pain they inflict then they just blame on that Labour government. But the Conservatives will never think like that. There is logic in doing that, but they will never think like that. The supreme virtue for them is power. They will not yield it for a second. Even if They allow themselves to think, what can Labour realistically do with a few years? They will not think like that. And the proof of this is that they have kept Boris Johnson in place. They're not happy with him. They're not happy with his government. He's there for one purpose and always was: win over ordinary working class voters in key constituencies. His surviving scandals that would have taken out other prime ministers is not because he's got a charmed life. It's because the electoral model that the Conservatives have adopted is to take votes for granted in their heartlands and to pump all their resources into vulnerable, long-held Labour seats. And it was a good strategy as well, because Labour had lost its grip in large parts of the country, and of course it worked. That justified the strategy. But it's high risk long term, because what it means is you have to abandon your own heartlands, because you can't make that twin offer. You've got to abandon your heartlands in the belief that nobody can encroach, that your power is so secure there that enough voters will, even if they don't like what you're doing, will hold their nose and vote for you as somehow being preferable to Labour. So they're trapped now, the Conservatives. They cannot now reverse and try and win the seats that got David Cameron his majority, because that's what you'd think. Why don't they just change and try and win? David Cameron won a majority in 2015 without those red wall seats. Why don't they just try and do that? It would need a complete sea change of policies. Not going to happen with the current parliamentary party, and there's not enough time anyway. They're stuck with their strategy of throwing everything at the red wall. That all their eggs in one basket. So much so that I'm even surprised they've not tried harder with actual policies. I know they won the red wall seats with lies, but they could have solidified their support by actually spending some money on investment there. They promised to. What they've actually done is scaled back the transport plans for the north of England, and now it's been confirmed that they will get less money from the government than they got from the EU for the development of poorer areas. So the left behind areas that the Conservatives said they're going to level up, they're going to level down. It's not just that the Conservatives aren't boosting investment in the north of England. They're actively reducing it, making it lower. We've got at least 2 years to make sure that as many voters in the red wall as possible know about that before the next election. But Boris Johnson has got a problem rather sooner. It's not the Partygate fines directly. You know, he's in line for several of them, meaning he's broken his own laws multiple times. His MPs don't really care about his criminality, only power, how it's perceived in the public. It's not even the local elections. A bad result next month can put pressure on the leader, but his MPs will have their eyes on the prize of the general election. They will dismiss any losses in local elections as the inevitable result of being the party in power. Certainly true that people do tend to want to rattle the cage of the party in power by voting against them in local elections. They can still end up voting for them in a general election. Voters see that as more important. But if Johnson loses Wakefield in the upcoming by-election, more serious. And that by-election I talked about a couple of days ago is now going to be sooner than I anticipated, because the former Tory MP of Wakefield, Imran Ahmed Khan, has resigned. I'm not sure exactly why. Could be various reasons. I know the reasons he's given. It's rubbish. It may simply be out of spite for the Tories not supporting him. But the bottom line is that we do not have to wait for legal appeals now. He's going to try and appeal it, but he's not going to be an MP while he does it. There's going to be a by-election, and it's going to be soon. That means this summer in Wakefield. An absolute must-win for both Labour and the Conservatives. A massive test for both. The winner will get a huge boost. The loser will be on the back foot. Now, it's not necessarily a make or break as such, but if Johnson loses Wakefield, he will be showing a vulnerability in the only area that makes him Prime Minister. The only thing he's Prime Minister for. The Tories know there are some red wall seats they'll lose. That's okay. They can afford to take some losses. They do not expect to win the next election with another landslide. A 20-seat majority will do them. In some ways, many MPs might prefer that as long as they keep their seats, because it gives those MPs more power over their leader on certain policies of interest. But Wakefield is an interesting test case. See, it's not a red wall seat that the Tories will probably have to abandon. There are some, it's like, yeah, that's just going to flip back. That's not the case in Wakefield. It's exactly the sort of seat that the Conservatives have to retain in order to remain in power next time round. And for Starmer and Labour, it's also a seat that they have to be able to win in order to prove that they can win power. So much of politics is perception, how voters see things. If Johnson loses Wakefield, his MPs will realise he could lose dozens of others like it, because there are dozens of others like it. A couple of days ago, there were some council by-elections. One interesting result in County Durham. This is not near Wakefield, but it's very much in the Red Wall. This has had nothing but Labour MPs since 1992. At the last election, 4 of the constituencies in County Durham flipped to the Conservatives. It's quite a similar area to Wakefield. The sort of seats that Starmer needs to get back to remain in power. Also the sort of seats Johnson has to retain. Well, the local by-election in West Auckland, which is a ward that was won by the Conservatives last year, previously won as well, but last year was the last time it went to the polls before last week, and they won it by 921 votes to Labour's 731. This week, the council unfortunately died, so there had to be a by-election. This week, Labour took it back with 956 votes to 554. Now, that was a boost not only to Labour's vote, but a collapse in the Conservative vote. And the same issues will come up for Wakefield. Yes, the Conservatives will roll out their full party machine for Wakey in a way that would be ridiculous for a local council by-election. But that will also count against Johnson. Because if he then loses it and he's thrown the kitchen sink at it, it's like you've done everything there. You threw everything at it. You rolled out the full machine and you still lost it. Are you going to cope when you've got to spread that machine across several constituencies in a general election? As an interesting aside, the Liberal Democrats also took a seat from the Conservatives on the same day with a massive swing. Labour stood aside. Labour and the Lib Dems are planning a little bit of cooperation this May as a trial run for a similar strategy at the next general elections. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. But interesting aside over, if Johnson commits everything to Wakefield, as he must, and loses, how can he convince his MPs that he can win it back in 2024? Much less retain the dozens of similar seats. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.